Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation, divorce, and mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. Today we'll discuss forensic psychology and mediation with Shari Belitz. Shari is an attorney as well as a trial, jury, and litigation consultant in New York. She also owns an educational company that teaches psychology to litigators. Welcome, Shari. How are you?
I'm doing great. Nice to be here, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
As we go back to cognitive biases, there are some other kind of situations and things that you can do to kind of overcome it or to deal with it. And so anchoring and adjustment are two concepts that you've talked about in other capacities. Can you tell us how anchoring or adjustment is related to cognitive bias?
Sure. So anchoring and adjustment actually is a cognitive bias. It is one of the more prevalent cognitive biases we see in mediation and litigation. And the way that litigators tend to think of anchoring and adjustment is usually with respect to money or with respect to numbers. So, for example, and it's really funny, I was just talking to someone this morning about anchoring and adjustment and about Dan Kahneman and Dan Kahneman's partner, Amos Tversky, who they really pioneered anchoring and adjustment. And we were talking a little bit about that. But that posits, the anchoring bias posits that first number that is given, whether it is the price of a house, the price of a car, or the price on a personal injury case, the audience, whether it's a buyer, whether it's a house buyer, whether it's a juror, whether it's a mediator, whether it's another litigant, is going to psychologically use that number and adjust off that number. So there have been studies shown that you can have identical cases, one with a $20 million settlement demand, one with a $10 million settlement demand, and the one with the $20 million settlement demand is going to ultimately settle for more money because it was anchored higher. So I'm going to tell you how to mitigate this, but let me also tell you, anchoring is not only something that we talk about in the realm of money and numbers. You can also anchor case themes. You can anchor words. You can anchor concepts and feelings. So, for example, let's say you have, you're defending a personal injury case and the plaintiff comes up with, this is a case about profits over people. I'm just like throwing out a very generic example here. You are best not to refute that anchor by saying, this isn't a case about profits over people. You don't want to, that's implicit acceptance of the anchor. You want to set your own anchor. This is a case about personal responsibility. This is a case about making good choices. So whoever sets that anchor first, whether it's words or a case theme or it's a monetary amount, they have the advantage. They set the anchor. In the personal injury context, it is plaintiffs. A good friend of mine who's a defense attorney is very fond of saying, how do you get a large verdict? You ask for it, and it's really that simple.
That is so interesting. So if we take anchoring, because we will see it in business valuation, everybody's like, give me a number, give me a number, give me a number. And I'm like, I hesitate even in the preliminary stages throwing out a number, right? Because it's the same thing. You see it time and time again. They hear this number and the interesting part is that sometimes they've heard another number, right? A spouse has said, oh, my business is going to be worth millions in some casual conversation. And so in their mind, it's worth millions. And then we come in and we say, well, maybe it's worth 500,000. They're like, what? And this is our own client, right? Because they've already anchored on some past stuff that we weren't even privy to, right? And so if I re-anchor it, they're still like, how do you get them not even thinking about that land anymore? Is that the adjustment part?
Well, the adjustment part actually works hand in hand with the anchoring. In order to set a new anchor, when we're talking, okay, so I'll talk about money in the context of mediation. So let's say plaintiff goes in with that $20 million demand. So the best way to refute that anchor is actually not to give another number, not to say, you know what, $250,000, because by giving that other number, by answering that demand so fast, what you're doing is you're implicitly accepting their anchor. And what you're doing is you've just drawn a range between 20 million and 250,000. And now every single person, mediator, litigants, attorneys, they are going to adjust, and you're going to get that midpoint problem, which you often see. And that may have no bearing on the case. It may have nothing to do with the value of the case. The value of the case isn't necessarily midway because this person's saying 20 million, this person's saying 250,000. What you have to do is actually refute that first anchor by not implicitly accepting it, not by giving another number, but by really knocking down the premises on which it is built. So, asking about, why $20 million? Show us your report. Show us, explain where you're getting the $20 million. So then strategically, so now you're moving things up kind of from that lizard brain, those cognitive biases, and you're thinking slow and you're thinking with your cerebral cortex, and you are moving things in a direction where you're asking for an explanation. Then you can give your own number, but it has to be backed by data. Let's say that number is 250,000 and you're backing it by data. You are now setting your own anchor instead of implicitly accepting that anchor and creating your range and creating your midpoint problem. And it's the same with case themes. You're saying why you're not implicitly accepting, you're putting forth your own case theme and giving a compelling, persuasive reason why that is the theme to adopt.
That is so interesting. I think that, sometimes when we see this situation from an expert witness perspective, I'm always like, we need to know the other position's basis, the assumptions, and we need to solidify them in their position in some capacity if we have a different position or if we have data that would support a different position. I need them to really anchor hard in their assumptions so that I can, especially if I know the assumption is wrong, right? Or
Right.
off by a little bit. Those are the places that I think that a lot of people are not negotiating from logic. They're negotiating from, I want 20 million. Well, and the other side's like, well, I don't want to pay 20 million. I only want to pay 250,000. Now, if you have wants on both sides, you're going to have an impasse, right? They're never going to get connected because they just want a random number. And I think that if you understand what goes into it, and if it's supportable, then, you have a very good point. That's how things kind of get done.